Sermon 34, From Sinai to the Promised Land.
Our story from the Bible tonight I've titled From Sinai to the Promised Land. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, the Bible says, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." Many have listed, that is, Bible historians, as the extent of the land being from the south, I guess we'd say, from Beersheba to the north to Dan, then of course to the Mediterranean Sea over to the great river, the Euphrates River, that being the extent of the land. After 430 years, the children of Israel found themselves at Mount Sinai, receiving instructions from God as to how they would conduct themselves after they would enter the Promised Land and while they were on their way to the Promised Land. They had been freed from Egyptian bondage and led to Mount Sinai by Moses, who was God's chosen leader. The life of Moses can be divided into three different periods of 40-year periods of time. The first 40 years he spent in the courts of Pharaoh. He grew up as a young man there and spent much of his adult life in the courts of Pharaoh. Then the second 40 years, he was in the land of Midian, there with his father-in-law Jethro, watching over his sheep, being a shepherd. And then the last 40 years, we find Moses in the wilderness leading the children of Israel. So a good outline for the life of Moses can be divided this way into three different sections. It was not God's original plan for Israel to be in the wilderness for 40 years. But because they disobeyed him, God had to alter his plan, and he basically had to work out his plan around sinful man. And that is the plan of fulfilling the promises that God had made to Abraham. He had fulfilled the child promise. He gave Abraham a son, Isaac. He had fulfilled the promise and continues to do so, the promise to multiply the children of Abraham as the stars of heaven, as the sand on the seashore. And now in the Bible period of time that we're studying, he is fulfilling the land promise that he would give Abraham's descendants, would receive the land whereon Abraham had sojourned. And it was a large land, contained a lot of space. And in order to obtain this land, they would have to drive out the nations that were there. And so God's plan was for Israel to leave Mount Sinai and to go into the Promised Land. And they were to do that after they had received the instructions that God had given there at Mount Sinai. Israel complained about everything. They complained about the food that they had to eat. They complained about the water that they had to drink. They complained about Moses being their leader. They complained because they had thoughts of things that they did in Egypt, and they just murmured and complained on a continual basis. In addition to all the murmuring and complaining that they did, they violated the law of God almost, it seemed like just as they would get out of one period of time of violating God's law, they would go into another. They made the golden calf, and it wasn't long after Moses made the second trip up Mount Sinai, and not the second trip in that it was the second time that he went up, but the second time that he went up to receive the law from God on tablets of stone, because you may remember Moses broke the first ones when he became angry with the children of Israel, and he threw them down, and the tablets of stone were broken, and he went back up on the mountain and stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving another set. And he came down and gave instructions as God had instructed him, and they made the tabernacle according to the pattern, and everything was set up, and preparation was ready. And of course, while all of this was going on, they were having to keep the law of God, and they were having to offer sacrifice, and they were having to get the fire ready for the altar and for the incense and things of this nature. And even after they had received these instructions, and God had told them exactly how to do this, we find again that those in Israel not listening or paying attention to God, and Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire unto the Lord. In other words, they took it upon themselves to make fire the way they wanted to. They didn't follow God's instructions, and as a result of their disobedience, they were struck dead. The Bible says that God sent down fire from heaven and consumed them because they did not follow the instructions that God had given. It seems like that Israel was set on not listening to what God had to say. Moses would give them the instructions, and they would say, we're going to do it. Everything that the Lord has said, we're going to do it. But they would not do that. They would just simply violate the laws of God. And this seems strange when you think about the fact of all the miracles that they had seen. You know, they had seen the parting of the Red Sea. They had watched as they went across on dry land, and as they got to the other side, and they stood and they looked back and they saw the power of God and how the Red Sea covered up the Egyptian army and destroyed the Egyptian army. They saw the manna that fell from heaven and how God fed them on a daily basis and took care of them and watched over them. And they saw the cloud that led them by day and the pillar of fire that led them by night. They saw the punishments that God had meted out when they would disobey. And you would think after witnessing all of these things that they would say, it's enough. We're going to do what God has said. We're going to follow the plan. We're going to carry out the wishes of God and do the things as God has spelled them out. The distance from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land was only approximately 200 miles. It was a 200-mile trip. A day's journey back in that time was estimated to be between 20 and 24 miles per day, saying that the average person could walk about 3 miles per hour, and if he walked 8 hours, that would be 24 miles that he could travel in a day. So it's reasonable to assume, based on those calculations, that Israel could have left Mount Sinai and they could have been in the land of promise, the land of Canaan, in 10 days. They could have been in the land, as God described it, that was flowing with milk and honey. They could have been under the protection of a loving and kind and a caring God. And they could have served Him in the land. Now, this is what they could have had. But this is not what they did have. The journey, let me back up just a little bit. The preparation in order for them to leave Mount Sinai was not a small matter. Yes, all the laws had been given. Everything that they needed to make their journey was ready. In addition to everything that God gave Moses to build, instructions that He gave him to build, He told Moses, I want you to make 2 silver trumpets. Now these trumpets were used to give directions to this multitude of people. Now it's estimated that Israel at this time, there were a total of about 2.5 million people. And they were a large camp. And so they would need some signal as to when they were to move out. Of course, they had the pillar of cloud that would go over the tabernacle, and it would move, and they would know to move, but they needed some organization. So these 2 trumpets would be sounded, and Moses had given instructions that when the trumpets would sound, that they were to proceed in their journey, that the tribe of Levi would take the tabernacle, that is, after they have packed everything up, and they would follow the cloud, and they would go out and basically lead the children of Israel, and then the tribe of Judah and the other tribes would follow after. And so there was an order that they had to follow. And so when the trumpets would sound, then they would know that it was time to make preparation to go forward. And there was a certain sound that the priest would give on the trumpets as if it were a warning as such. If they were to be warned about something. And there was a certain sound that would be given by the trumpets if they were to be gathered in assembly. So preparation was being made for them to be able to leave Mount Sinai. Before they left Mount Sinai, Moses numbered the men that were capable of going to war. This is those men, those males that were 20 years old and upward that were in good health enough that they could go and fight. And that number was estimated to be 603,550. And from this estimation, of course, they can estimate the other number of males and the other females that were in the company, and that's where you get your approximate number of 2.5 million people. The two trumpets would give the signal. They would begin to move. The cloud moved with the tabernacle, moved out away from Mount Sinai. The cloud came off of Mount Sinai and moved out into the wilderness of Paran. Later we'll find that it went a total of 3 days' journey, approximately 60 miles, that they had gotten away from Mount Sinai. Also, before leaving, as the preparation was made and people were assembling and they were going that way, Moses asked his brother-in-law, Hobed, if he would go with them as a guide. And he promised him a reward, and that is that you'll be blessed. If you will go with us and if you will guide us through the wilderness, you will be to us instead of eyes. In other words, basically, I need you to help me in this matter. Many have wondered, why did Moses ask him to do that when God was leading them? I would suggest that just from a human standpoint, Moses wanted somebody that was familiar with the wilderness. When he asked his brother-in-law first said, no, I'm not going to go. I'm going to go back home. And then Moses again pleaded with him and said, if you go with us, and God's going to bless us when we get into this land that he's promised, and when God blesses us, he's going to bless you. The Bible does not tell us whether or not Moses' brother-in-law went with them and guided them through the wilderness. But it does tell us that Moses did ask him and pleaded with him to do this for him. To go and to be their guide and lead them through the wilderness. So they had made their preparation. The cloud is now moved away from Mount Sinai. It's gone a 3 days journey into the wilderness, and it has stopped. And of course it would take time for the children of Israel to come from Mount Sinai to get to where the cloud has stopped, and they would make camp, and they would be able to once again assemble around the tabernacle would be set up, and at this point they could do the things that were necessary that they needed to do in worship and things along this line. So you have from Mount Sinai a 3 days journey, and from Sinai to where the tabernacle stopped and the cloud stopped, Israel is just full of trouble. 3 days. And you would think, surely these people can go 3 days without trouble. That they could make a 3 days journey. They could come and they could be there and they could follow the instructions that have been given by Moses. I want you to notice what Moses said as the cloud would begin to move and as the cloud stopped. Moses said, it came to pass when the ark set forward that Moses said, "Rise up, Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee." Now this was a prayer of Moses. This is what he would say as the ark of the tabernacle would be going forward and be following the cloud, and the Levites there would be carrying it, and of course the rest of Israel would be behind them following. Moses would make this statement as they would set forward. He would say, "Rise up, Lord, and let thy enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee before thee." And when it came to a stop, and when it rested, he said, "Return, O Lord, unto the many thousands of Israel." That was his prayer when it came to stop. And that is, God, come back to us and be with us. And only 3 days out, the people start complaining. They start complaining. And God was angry, and rightfully so. God was angry with them. And he sent fire to the outer parts of the camp that consumed some of the people, some of the complainers. What were they complaining about this time? What were they needing in their life? They'd only left Mount Sinai and they had only gone a 3 days journey. What could they possibly need that they were complaining? And God was consuming them because of their complaints. And Moses, the leader, was upset with the people. But yet he was praying to God. And he was asking God again to be with Israel. What Israel was complaining about this time, they didn't have meat to eat. And not only did they complain that they didn't have meat to eat, the Bible says, we remember the fish that we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic, but now our soul is dried away. We're just wasted away out here in this wilderness. There's nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. Now this is what the complainers were saying. We don't have any meat to eat. Basically like that commercial used to come on television, where's the beef? It didn't mean that they didn't have animals. They did have animals with them. But they were complaining. They were complaining because they didn't have cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic and all the things, that they remembered in Egypt. And we need to be reminded, Israel did not have a cushy life in Egypt. And it may be occasions that they did get some melons, and they did get some cucumbers, and they did get some garlic, and they did get some onions, and they did get some of these things that they listed. But I think it's reasonable to assume that those things were few and far between. It's about like when I was a child, we used to pick and chop cotton, and Daddy'd come by in his pickup and load us all up and take us down to the store and buy us a Coke and a treat or something. Those times were few and far between. But Israel was complaining because they said, we missed these things. And God was angry with Israel. And Moses was angry and frustrated with Israel. 3 days journey from Mount Sinai. And they're murmuring and complaining again. Moses said unto the Lord, wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? Talking about himself. Lord, why have you put this weight on me? What did I do? And I'm paraphrasing. What did I do to deserve this? Get real. What did I do? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, Moses said, that thou layest this burden of all this people, 2.5 million people upon me? Have I conceived all these people? He said, they're not my children. I'm not their daddy. What did I do to deserve this? Have I forgotten thee? Moses asked God. Have I begotten them, rather? He asked God. That thou shouldest say unto me, carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth a sucking child unto the land which thou swearest unto their father. Moses is simply saying, Lord, am I going to have to carry these complaining, bickering, rebellious children to the land as a father would carry his children? They're not my kids. Why did I have to do this? You may remember when God said to Moses back in the land of Midian, I want you to go and I want you to deliver my people. And Moses said, I don't want to do that. That's what he told God. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. He said to God, who am I that you select me? He made his excuses. He said, well, I can't. I'm not a good speaker. I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. Moses said. God said, well, Aaron, your brother, he talks pretty good. He'll speak for you. And that's important to remember there. Aaron was the spokesman. Moses spoke to Pharaoh through Aaron. Moses didn't want this job. He went into this job kicking and screaming, so to speak. And now he says to God, he's frustrated with the people and he's angry with them because they continue to just complain and complain. He said, when should I have flesh to give unto this people? How can I feed 2.5 million people? They're wanting flesh to eat. They want meat. How can I feed them? I'm not able to bear all this people alone because it's too heavy for me. Moses is saying to God, I can't handle this job. I'm ready to resign. Now keep in mind, not too prior to this, God had said to Moses, just get out of the way and let me kill them. God wasn't happy with them either. And at this particular time, he's sending down fire from heaven that's consuming some of the people in the outer parts of the camp that are complaining. And now Moses is turning to God and saying, I'm tired of this group of people. I can't handle this. So this is what God did for Moses. God said, select you 70 elders. Pick you 70 men, that's good men. You make them elders, overseers, literally, to help you out. Also, at this particular time, God began to send prophets in among the people. 2 prophets that we read about at this time are Eldad and Medad. And they were going in among the 2.5 million people, and they were telling the people what God wanted them to hear. Interesting also, at this time, Joshua gets jealous. Not for himself, but Joshua is jealous for Moses. And he goes to Moses and he says, Moses, stop these fellows from prophesying, They're out here talking to the people and telling them God says this and God says this. And God had said that. God was now using prophets. He's helping Moses out. And to show you the character of Moses, the Bible says that Moses was one of the meekest men on earth. He wasn't jealous of these men out there prophesying. He wasn't jealous at all. He said to Joshua, when Joshua said, stop them, don't let them be doing this. Moses said, I wish that every child of God could prophesy. I wish they could all prophesy. I wish they was all prophets. And in response to the murmuring and complaining of the people, God sent quail for the children of Israel to eat. Now, I've never eaten quail, but I know people that have, and they said it's pretty good eating. Pretty good food. And God sent quail. But God was angry with Israel, and along with the quail, he sent a plague. He sent them the meat that they were asking for. But in punishment, he sent a plague. And when he sent this plague, all those that had been murmuring and complaining, the Bible says that while the meat was between their teeth, God sent the plague. And those who murmured and complained, those who lusted, the Bible said, after the things of Egypt, that God took their lives. Now that was their punishment. This is a 3 days journey. Leaving Mount Sinai and going to the promised land should have only taken about 10 days. Only taken about 10 days. But Israel wasn't going to have it. They were just not going to cooperate. They were not going to help matters. They were not going to help Moses. They were going to just cause problems. There was trouble on the way. The second thing that we read about is Miriam and Aaron rebel against their own brother. This may have been brought on by the fact that this particular time there were leaders selected, the 70 elders, basically to share the leadership. And there were prophets sent in among the people. And Miriam and Aaron were looking and thinking about this idea of leadership. I'm sure this is what was going on in their mind when they came up against their brother. Because as you read the scriptures, it bears out the fact that they said, has God not spoken to us? Moses is not the only one. He's not the only one that God has spoken to. God has spoken to us. Interesting also here, Miriam takes the lead. Aaron did a lot of good things in the Bible, but Aaron just doesn't seem to have any backbone. He just sort of goes along. And I think his sister at this particular time had a ring in his nose and was pulling him where she wanted him to go. Just like when he made the golden calf. You may remember what he said about that. When Moses came down off the mountain and Moses was angry, Aaron didn't say, I told him to bring me the jewelry and stuff and I made this calf. He said, I threw all this stuff in the fire and out popped this calf. I like that part of the Bible. Shows the character of Aaron. He wanted to pass it to somebody else. And so now they're standing and they're rebelling against Moses, and they're saying, who is this Moses? He's not the only one that God has spoken through. He's spoken through us. As if Moses did not have enough problems, now he's got his own family members. And they may have been thinking, what happens if Moses dies? Who is the leader then? Is it going to be one of Moses' half-bred children? Moses did marry a foreigner. He married a Midianite. And that's the thing they bring up. They say, Moses is married an Ethiopian. Now, I used to think that Moses had two wives, but after doing a lot of study, I've come to the conclusion I don't think he had but just one. Now, Josephus, the Jewish historian, as a matter of fact, the only time that you will ever read about this, as it mentions here, the Ethiopian woman is here in this particular story. She's never mentioned again. The Bible doesn't say that Moses had two wives. It just mentions Zipporah as being his wife, but it mentions this Ethiopian woman. Josephus says in his history that this Ethiopian woman was a woman that Moses, while he was in Egypt, went to do a battle against the people of Africa. And while he was doing this battle, he saw a black woman that he liked, and he married her. But other Jewish historians said that don't make sense because the Egyptians were so prejudiced against the Ethiopians or any other race of people that they would not even allow the Hebrews to be in amongst them. You may remember in the Bible that they put them over in the land of Goshen because of their prejudice. And it really is not logical that Moses would go if he was in the courts of Pharaoh there, that he would not go and bring back a woman to live in the courts of Pharaoh that would violate the laws of Egypt. That Moses would become an outcast as such. And Josephus is the one that mentioned this. Many of the Bible historians say that there's a play on words here. That what was said in the original language was this Cushan woman. Cushan. Meaning that she was from the descendants of Midian that lived around Sinai. And the prophet Habakkuk makes reference to that in Habakkuk 3 and verse 7. He said, I saw the tents of Cushan in the affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. But whether or not this has reference to Moses having two wives or one makes no difference. It doesn't change the fact that God selected Moses to be the leader of the children of Israel. It doesn't change the fact that Aaron and his sister Miriam were jealous because of Moses' leadership. And so to settle this argument, see, they were bringing this before the people of Israel. They were causing trouble. God called them all three out into the middle of the nation of Israel. He said, y'all come on out, all three of you. And he places them there in the middle. And he says, if I select a leader, I'm the one that has that right to do that. Now this is God's decision. If I select someone to lead, I have that right to do that. I'm God. And that settles it. And as a result of their rebellion, God struck Miriam with leprosy. She became as white as snow because she rebelled not only against Moses but against God's selection of Moses as being the leader. And Aaron, realizing what they had done, came to Moses and asked Moses to go to God and ask God to heal her. Heal her. I want you to, do something here. This is our sister, Heal her. The law concerning leprosy was a leper was to be put out of the camp. They couldn't be around the people. They could not be there. And Aaron wanted Moses to go to God on her behalf. And I want you to listen to what God told Moses when Moses went to God on Miriam's behalf and asked God to heal her. God said, if her father, talking about Miriam's father, had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? That is, if she had rebelled against her own father and he spit in her face, then she should be ashamed of what she did. And God says she's going to remain with this leprosy outside of the camp for 7 days. She's going to learn not to do what she did. And this was the conclusion of the matter. Moses had a lot of difficulty in leading the children of Israel. And this is only a 3 days journey into the wilderness when all of these things begin to happen. And it's just like they get over one and Israel comes up with another. And God is leading them. Disobedience unto God is always punished. If not in this life, in the life to come. God took the lives of many of the children of Israel because of their disobedience. He took their physical life. Just in our story tonight, the people that were murmuring and complaining, God gave them what they wanted. He gave them the meat that they were asking for, those who murmured and complained. But he sent a plague that killed those that were murmuring and complaining. He punished those that were wicked. He rewards those that are just, and he punishes those that are wicked. That's the way of God. And that's the examples that are given in our story tonight. If you're here tonight, you need to respond to the invitation. The invitation is yours while we stand and while we sing.